Welcome back to our channel. But today, don't just watch a video. Today, witness a story that changed the world. A story so powerful, so terrifying, and so emotional that it will stay with you forever. This is not a fictional tale. This is not a superhero movie. This is the real story of a man who unlocked the power of the universe and lived to regret it for the rest of his life. His invention ended a world war. His words shook the earth. I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. His mind gave birth to the atomic bomb, but his soul was destroyed by it. His name was J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, the man who gave humanity the ability to wipe itself out in seconds. So why should you listen to this story? Because it's not just history, it's about you, your dreams, your pain, your ambition, your fears. This story is about how intelligence without wisdom can destroy. It's about how one decision can change the fate of the entire planet. And as you listen, you will not only feel inspired, shocked, and emotional, you will also improve your English. You will learn real, powerful English through the most unforgettable story in human history. So sit back, focus deeply, and prepare yourself for the real story of the man who created hell on Earth. Part 1. The Silent Genius. The child who saw the universe differently. Who was Oppenheimer? J. Robert Oppenheimer was born on April 22, 1904 in New York City, in a large apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. He was born into a wealthy, cultured Jewish family. His father, Julius Oppenheimer, was a German immigrant who became a successful textile importer. His mother, Ella Friedman, was a painter. They were not religious, but they were educated and respected in society. From the outside, his early life looked perfect. A beautiful home, good food, and a loving family. But inside young Robert, something was different. While other boys were playing outside, Robert stayed indoors, reading for hours. He didn't care about toys or games. He cared about rocks, stars, atoms, and the invisible forces of nature. At just 5 years old, he was already reading science books written for adults. At 9, he was studying minerals and chemistry. At 12, he was writing letters to geologists and physicists, and they were shocked by his knowledge. His teachers said he had a mind like no other, but his classmates didn't understand him. He was awkward, quiet, and often lonely. He would speak in long, complicated sentences that confused other kids. He was bullied, isolated, but he didn't stop learning. He would walk alone in the park, thinking about the universe. While other children were thinking about toys, Robert was thinking about atoms, the smallest building blocks of life. He was not just a boy. He was a storm waiting to happen. By the time Robert entered Harvard University, he was only 18 years old, and he was already far beyond most of his professors. He studied physics, chemistry, philosophy, Sanskrit, Greek, literature, and art. He wasn't just a scientist. He was a poet, a philosopher, a thinker, a dreamer, and a deeply emotional man. But there was a dark side. Robert suffered from depression. He had breakdowns. He often felt like he didn't belong in this world. At one point, while studying in Cambridge, England, he became so unstable. He tried to poison his professor out of frustration. He was stopped. But the signs were clear. His mind was powerful, but it was dangerous. Eventually, Robert left England and moved to Germany to study under some of the world's greatest scientists like Max Born and Werner Heisenberg. There, he learned about the quantum world, the strange, invisible reality that lies beneath everything we see. Robert was fascinated. He wasn't just learning. He was dreaming of how to control atoms, the very building blocks of the universe. By the time he returned to America in the 1930s, he had become one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists in the world. He started teaching at UC Berkeley and Caltech, and soon his students called him a genius. But even then, nobody knew what was coming. Not even him. Meanwhile, far away in Germany, something evil was rising. Adolf Hitler had taken power. The world was on the edge of war again. And in 1938, German scientists made a discovery that would change everything. They had split the uranium atom. That single event, called nuclear fission, proved something terrifying. It was now possible to create a bomb so powerful, it could destroy entire cities in one strike. America panicked. What if Hitler got the bomb first? What if the Nazis used it to rule the world? So the US government started a top-secret project. It was called the Manhattan Project. Its mission, build an atomic bomb before the Nazis do. And they needed a leader, someone with vision, someone brilliant, someone who could see the invisible. That someone was Robert Oppenheimer. After the US government chose Robert Oppenheimer to lead the Manhattan Project, it wasn't just a job. It was a mission that would define the future of humanity. But there was a problem. Nobody had ever built an atomic bomb before. There were no instructions, no blueprints, no second chances. This was uncharted territory, and they needed to build everything from scratch. Scientists, labs, housing, equipment, all in complete secrecy. So Oppenheimer made a radical decision: take them to the desert. He chose a remote, empty place in New Mexico called Los Alamos. Surrounded by mountains, dirt roads, no city, no reporters, no distractions. It was isolated, quiet, and perfect. In 1943, Oppenheimer and a small group of top scientists moved to Los Alamos. Within months, that empty desert became a living, breathing scientific city. Houses were built, labs were created, security fences were put up. Soldiers guarded every road. Even the workers and families living there didn't know what they were building. Everyone had a number instead of a name. Letters were censored. Phone calls were monitored. If someone asked, people would say, "We're just working on government research." In reality, they were building the most powerful weapon ever imagined. Oppenheimer handpicked some of the smartest scientists in the world: Enrico Fermi, who had built the first nuclear reactor; Niels Bohr, the Danish physicist who helped develop quantum theory; Richard Feynman, a young genius with a wild mind; Edward Teller, who later designed the hydrogen bomb. More than 6,000 people were eventually working at Los Alamos, including wives, children, cooks, janitors, and engineers. And in the middle of it all was Oppenheimer, a man who had never run a lab before, a man with no experience leading a massive project. But somehow he made it work. How? Because he inspired people. He wasn't just a scientist. He was a leader, a philosopher, a visionary, and a deeply emotional man. He would walk into the labs wearing a black hat and smoking a pipe, talking about science and poetry in the same breath. He quoted the Bhagavad Gita, Shakespeare, and Einstein. He didn't just talk formulas. He talked about what this bomb meant for humanity. Even the military officers respected him. Despite his thin body, soft voice, and strange personality, they called him the father of the bomb. While the labs were working day and night, Oppenheimer pushed everyone harder. He knew the Nazis were also working on a nuclear bomb. Every hour of delay could mean the enemy would win. So they worked like machines, splitting atoms, calculating reactions, designing the bomb's core, figuring out how to make it small enough to drop from a plane, but big enough to destroy a city. It was the most complex scientific problem ever attempted in human history. And it was all done by hand. No computers. Only chalkboards, notebooks, and human minds. They had to invent new materials, solve problems that had never existed before. Even a small mistake could cause the entire bomb to fail, or kill the people working on it. The secrecy was extreme. Workers couldn't tell their families what they were doing. Wives didn't know what their husbands were building. Children were playing near labs that held weapons of mass destruction. Every scientist had a security clearance, and even a whisper of communism in their past could get them fired. FBI agents watched everything. The government feared spies, and with good reason. Later, it was discovered that Soviet spies had infiltrated the Manhattan Project. But at the time, nobody knew. All they knew was, we must finish the bomb before the enemy does. As the bomb got closer to completion, something strange happened inside the minds of the scientists. They weren't just excited anymore. They were afraid. They began asking questions like, what if this bomb starts a chain reaction and burns the Earth's atmosphere? Oppenheimer had the same fears. He couldn't sleep. He walked alone at night, staring at the stars. He once said to a colleague, "In some strange way, I feel like I've already died. And what we are doing here is something the world will never forgive." But still, he kept going. Because if he didn't do it, someone else would. If America didn't build it, Hitler might. So they pushed forward. By 1945, the bomb was almost ready. Now, it was time to test it. A location was chosen, the Jornada del Muerto Desert in New Mexico. It means Journey of the Dead Man. It was dry, empty, desolate. The perfect place to set off an explosion the world had never seen. The test was given a name, Trinity. The bomb was placed on a tall metal tower 100 feet high. Scientists built bunkers miles away. Cameras were placed, instruments set, warnings issued, and on July 16th, 1945, before dawn, the world changed. The night before the test, July 15th, 1945, the desert air was heavy with silence. At Los Alamos, the scientists didn't sleep. Some were checking calculations for the 100th time. Others sat in bunkers, staring at the sky. Even Oppenheimer was quiet. He had always been a man of many thoughts, quoting poetry, whispering science. But that night, he stood in stillness, hands in his pockets, looking at the tower they had built. A tower that now held a new sun, ready to be born. The scientists had done their best, but still, they didn't know what would happen. Some feared the blast might ignite the sky and destroy the entire planet. Others thought it might just fizzle out and fail. But most of all, they feared what would happen if it worked. The test was scheduled for 4 a.m., but a storm rolled in. Wind, lightning, thunder. The countdown was delayed. Oppenheimer stood on a metal observation platform 10 miles away with a few others. He barely blinked. His heart was beating, but his mind was somewhere else. He later said he remembered lines from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, it would be like the splendor of the Mighty One. At exactly 5:29:45 a.m. on July 16, 1945, the world changed. The desert was silent for a moment. Then came the flash, a light brighter than anything ever seen on Earth. So bright, men saw the bones in their hands through their skin. So bright, it turned night into day. Then came the fireball, a monstrous sphere of heat, color, and death rising into the sky. And then, the shockwave, a sound like the sky had been torn apart. Windows shattered, sand melted into glass. A mushroom cloud climbed over 7 miles high. The earth stood still. The scientists stared, speechless. Some cheered, some cried, some collapsed in silence, unable to believe what they had done. But Oppenheimer said nothing. He simply whispered, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." These words were not just dramatic, they were deeply personal. They came from a 2,000-year-old scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, which Oppenheimer had studied for years. It was the moment when a warrior accepts his duty to fight, even if it brings destruction. And that's what Oppenheimer had become. Not a scientist, not a father, but a man who had opened the gates of destruction and could never close them again. After the explosion, many scientists felt proud. They had solved the unsolvable, but others were horrified. They realized this was not just a weapon. This was a new age, a nuclear age, where humans could destroy themselves in minutes. One scientist, Kenneth Bainbridge, said to Oppenheimer after the test, "Now we are all sons of B-yes." It was a half joke, but behind it was truth. They had done something that could never be undone. As Trinity shook the desert across the ocean, World War II was still burning. Germany had surrendered in May, but Japan was still fighting. The US government had to decide, should we use the bomb, the real bomb, on human beings? Or should we warn Japan, show the power, and ask for peace? The decision was not Oppenheimer's to make, but he was called to Washington to speak with President Harry Truman's advisors. He didn't resist. In fact, Oppenheimer believed that using the bomb once, just once, might save lives by ending the war quickly. He said, "In some ways, we feel that we have blood on our hands. But we also feel that if we don't use it, the war might continue and kill millions more." But he underestimated the power of what they had made. Nobody fully understood what it would do to cities, to children, to innocent civilians. August 6, 1945, 8:15 a.m. A U.S. plane named Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. In seconds, the city was turned to fire. 80,000 people died instantly. Thousands more were burned, blinded, or crushed. 3 days later, on August 9th, another bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Another 40,000 people died in moments. Survivors were left with unimaginable injuries and radiation sickness. Oppenheimer didn't drop the bomb, but he had built it. And when he heard what happened, he broke inside. He realized this was not just the end of the war. This was the end of innocence, the end of science being only for good. A few weeks later, Oppenheimer was invited to meet President Truman. He walked into the White House, thin, tired, deeply shaken. Truman was smiling. The war was over. But Oppenheimer looked down and said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman was stunned. He later told his aides, "I never want to see that crybaby in my office again." From that moment, Oppenheimer knew the government no longer needed him, and worse, they didn't trust him anymore. the man who had helped end the war, was now seen as a threat. Part 2. The Fall of the Father. How America Destroyed Oppenheimer. The world was celebrating. In August 1945, after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, World War II officially ended. America was now the most powerful country on Earth, thanks to the atomic bomb. Oppenheimer's name was in newspapers. He was called a hero, a genius, a savior. But inside his heart, there was only silence. He didn't want medals. He didn't want parades. He didn't even want to be thanked, because he couldn't forget the photos. Burned bodies, melted faces, children screaming, cities turned to ash. His invention had worked, but it had worked too well. Oppenheimer returned to Los Alamos after the war, but he was not the same man. He avoided people. He spoke less. He lost weight. He was haunted by one question. What have I done? At night, he had nightmares. He would wake up sweating, dreaming of bombs falling from the sky. Sometimes he would stare out the window for hours, not saying a word, just remembering. He knew the war was won, but at what cost? He once said, "In some crude sense, which no vulgarity can express, the physicists have known sin, and this is a knowledge which they cannot lose." This was not science anymore. It was spiritual pain. Instead of continuing to build bigger bombs, Oppenheimer began doing something unexpected. He started speaking against nuclear weapons. He gave public talks. He warned political leaders. He wrote letters to stop the spread of atomic bombs. He believed that what happened in Japan should never happen again. He believed that science should be used for understanding, not for destruction. He met with President Truman's advisors and asked for international control of nuclear weapons, a global agreement to prevent more bomb-making. But the timing was terrible, because America was no longer just fighting wars with guns. In the late 1940s, a new fear began to rise: the Soviet Union. The US had used the atomic bomb first, but now the Soviets were working on their own bomb. The Cold War had started, a war of secrets, spies, and power. America wanted more bombs, bigger bombs, stronger bombs. They wanted something called the hydrogen bomb, a bomb 1,000 times more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima. Oppenheimer refused. He said it was a weapon of genocide, and he did not want to be part of it. He believed that building more bombs would lead to mutual destruction, that it would start an arms race no one could stop. But his refusal made powerful people angry. People in the US government began to whisper, "Why is Oppenheimer against the hydrogen bomb? Why is he meeting with foreign scientists? Didn't he have communist friends in the past?" You see, back in the 1930s, Oppenheimer had attended left-wing meetings. His wife, Catherine, Kitty, had once been a Communist Party member. His brother, Frank, had also been politically active. Back then, these things didn't matter much. But now, during the Cold War, they became dangerous. The US government was paranoid. They feared spies. They feared Soviet influence. They even feared their own citizens. And so they began looking at Oppenheimer not as a hero, but as a potential traitor. In 1954, it all exploded. Oppenheimer was called to a secret hearing by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, AEC. He was accused of delaying the hydrogen bomb, having communist connections, being a security risk. It wasn't a fair trial. He wasn't allowed to have a lawyer inside the room. His private conversations were used against him. Old friends were forced to testify. Even his loyalty to America was questioned. Oppenheimer tried to defend himself with logic, honesty, and calm words. But they didn't want truth. They wanted to silence him. The hearing lasted 4 weeks. Oppenheimer, once the most respected scientist in America, was now interrogated like a criminal. Every detail of his life was opened. His past relationships, his family, his beliefs, even old letters from 20 years ago. His name, once connected with genius, was now being dragged through the mud. On June 29, 1954, the AEC made its decision. Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked. That meant he could no longer access government secrets. He could no longer work on atomic projects. He was officially cut off from the world he had helped create. It was a brutal fall from greatness. Oppenheimer was crushed. He didn't scream. He didn't protest. He simply walked out. Quietly. He returned to Princeton, where he gave lectures and continued to write. But something inside him had died. The man who gave America the bomb, the man who had helped win the war, was now treated as an enemy. His friends tried to support him, but the pain was too deep. Even his family felt the sadness. His wife, Kitty, drank heavily. Their home life became cold, quiet, and distant. He once said to a friend, "When you see something that is technically sweet, you go ahead and do it." And that's what we did. We had the theory, the materials, the chance. We built it. And then we realized the consequences. Part 3. The Invisible Man. When a genius is left alone with his regret. After losing his security clearance, Oppenheimer was no longer useful to the country he once served. He was not arrested. He was not put in jail. But he was treated as if he didn't exist. No more government meetings. No more invitations to scientific conferences. No more role in shaping America's future. He was simply cut off. From being the face of atomic power, he became a ghost in his own country. Oppenheimer moved to a quiet house in Princeton, New Jersey, with his wife Kitty and their 2 children, Peter and Tony. But this was not a happy home. He tried to continue his work by writing papers, giving lectures, and thinking deeply about physics, philosophy, and humanity. But inside, he was breaking. He would spend hours sitting near the window, watching the trees move in silence. Sometimes he'd smoke his pipe and stare at nothing. His once brilliant voice became quiet, his sharp mind now filled with doubts. He had given the world a weapon that could end it. But no one wanted to hear what he had to say after that. Oppenheimer's pain didn't just live inside him. It spread to his family. His wife, Kitty, became more and more angry and bitter. She felt the world had stolen her husband. She started drinking heavily and pushing people away. Their daughter, Tony, was intelligent like her father, but emotionally fragile. She struggled with depression and later in life took her own life. A tragedy that broke the Oppenheimer family even further. Their son, Peter, grew up with the weight of his father's silence and genius, but kept a distance from the spotlight. This was not a house of joy. It was a house of quiet pain. A house full of books, memories, and regret. Even though the world turned its back on him, Oppenheimer never stopped thinking. He gave lectures at universities, mostly about science and ethics. He warned people, again and again, about the dangers of nuclear weapons. But now, nobody listened like they used to. The same people who once praised him now saw him as a man from the past. One newspaper called him the man who opened the door to the atomic age and then got lost in it. Oppenheimer often quoted the Bhagavad Gita in his speeches, the same scripture he had quoted after Trinity. He once said, "In battle, in the forest, at the precipice in the mountains, on the dark great sea, in the midst of javelins and arrows, in sleep, in confusion, in the depths of shame, the good deeds a man has done before defend him." These were not just poetic words. They were the quiet prayers of a man trying to forgive himself. While Oppenheimer lived in quiet exile, the world kept changing. The Soviet Union built its own atomic bombs. The hydrogen bomb was developed, the very bomb Oppenheimer had opposed. Countries around the world joined the nuclear arms race. America became more powerful, but also more afraid. Nuclear weapons were no longer a secret. They were becoming a normal part of global politics. Oppenheimer watched this unfold with sadness. He once said, "In trying to defend freedom, we may have helped create a world where fear rules more than freedom." The very thing he had helped build to end a war was now being used to threaten peace. Oppenheimer was always more than a scientist. He was a philosopher, a humanist, a man who thought about the meaning of life. But modern science was now focused on power, money, and speed. He began to feel that the true purpose of science, to understand nature and improve humanity, was being lost. He told students, "The physicists have known sin, and we must not forget that." He wasn't trying to be dramatic. He was trying to remind them that science without ethics is dangerous. In his later years, Oppenheimer often traveled to a small island called St. John in the Caribbean. There, he found a small sense of peace. He would walk along the beach, sit under trees, watch the sea, and think in silence. No one called him death there. No one judged him. He was just Robert, a tired man with a brilliant mind and a heavy heart. He still gave lectures sometimes, but less and less. Each year he became quieter, thinner, slower, as if the weight of the bomb was still pressing down on him. In public, he was polite, calm, gentle. But behind his eyes was a lifetime of thoughts no one else could fully understand. He had seen the beginning of a new age and watched it become a nightmare. He had given humanity the power of gods and was now paying the price of that creation. He never begged for forgiveness. He never called himself a victim, but the world could see the pain in his silence. Oppenheimer was not just a man. He had become a symbol of how far the human mind can go and how far the heart can fall when there are no limits. Part 4. The Man Who Became a Warning. The Final Days of J. Robert Oppenheimer. By the early 1960s, Oppenheimer had become quiet, thinner, and weaker. He had stopped traveling as much. He rarely gave public speeches. He spent more time alone, by the sea, or in his study, surrounded by books and silence. But inside his body, another battle had begun. In 1965, doctors diagnosed him with throat cancer, likely caused by decades of heavy smoking. He had smoked his pipe almost every day since he was a young man. Now it was taking everything from him: his voice, his strength, his life. He began to lose weight rapidly. He couldn't eat without pain. Speaking became difficult. The man whose words once shook the world was now slowly losing his ability to speak at all. He underwent radiation treatments and chemotherapy, but his condition worsened. He stayed mostly at his home in Princeton, cared for by doctors, his wife Kitty, and a few close friends. But he didn't complain. He didn't cry out. He endured, just like he had endured betrayal, shame, and regret. In private, he read books, mostly philosophy, poetry, and the Bhagavad Gita, the same book that had once helped him find meaning in destruction. When visitors came, he smiled gently. But behind that smile was a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and lived too long with a burden too heavy to carry. In 1963, 2 years before his cancer was discovered, something unexpected happened. The US government, after almost a decade of silence, decided to give Oppenheimer a small honor, the Enrico Fermi Award, one of the highest scientific awards in the country. President Lyndon B. Johnson approved it. It was supposed to be a way of saying, "We're sorry, we were wrong, you deserved better." But Oppenheimer knew what this was. It was not justice. It was not forgiveness. It was a political apology, offered too late after everything had been taken from him. Still, he accepted the award. He stood on the stage, thin and weak, wearing a black suit and soft smile. He gave a short speech, just a few words, polite, thoughtful, but not emotional. Inside, he knew, "They cannot return what they destroyed in me." In early 1967, the cancer spread. He could no longer walk without help. His voice became almost a whisper. His wife, Kitty, rarely left his side. Friends came to visit him, old colleagues, students, even some of the very people who had once testified against him. He never shouted at them. He didn't show anger. He simply welcomed them with kindness. Because in the end, he wasn't trying to punish anyone. He was trying to understand what it all meant. The bomb, the war, the betrayal, the silence. He once whispered to a friend, "When I look back, I see a chain of choices. Each one made sense at the time. But taken together, they led to something I did not choose." That was Oppenheimer, a man trapped inside a legacy he no longer controlled. On February 18, 1967, at the age of 62, J. Robert Oppenheimer died in his home. There were no headlines, no sirens, no crowds in the streets. Only silence. The man who had once brought fire to earth died quietly, in a small house, surrounded by a few people and a mountain of forgotten memories. No atomic scientist had ever fallen from such a height. No genius had ever paid a price so heavy for doing what he thought was necessary. After his death, many scientists, historians, and leaders began to rethink his legacy. Some called him a hero. Some called him a tragedy. Some called him a monster. But most called him a warning. Today, his name is remembered in history books, movies, and science. But it is not remembered with celebration. It is remembered with a question. Just because we can do something, should we? That is the question Oppenheimer's life left behind. A question that still lives with every nuclear weapon in the world. Let me now give you the deepest and most powerful lessons from Oppenheimer's life, so you never forget what this story truly means. 1. Intelligence without conscience is dangerous. Oppenheimer was one of the smartest people in the world. But even he admitted, "We didn't think enough about the consequences. Being smart is not enough. You must also be wise. You must also be kind. Because without a heart, your brain can build destruction." 2. Even the most powerful feel regret. He built the bomb, he changed history. But it did not bring him peace. Fame is not peace. Power is not joy. Only a clear soul can give you real happiness. 3. Don't let the world use you and throw you away. Oppenheimer gave everything for his country, but when they were done with him, they turned their back on him. You must be careful. Never sacrifice your entire self for a system that doesn't value your humanity. 4. Silence is the loudest scream. He never fought back with anger, but his silence said everything. Sometimes the deepest truths are not spoken. They are felt, and Oppenheimer's silence became a symbol for every scientist, leader, and dreamer who realizes they went too far. 5. You can't undo what you create. So create carefully. The atomic bomb cannot be unmade. The destruction cannot be reversed. What you build today might change the future forever. So ask yourself every day, am I building something that will help people or hurt them? Oppenheimer's story is not just a history lesson. It is a mirror for all of us. It shows what happens when intelligence moves faster than morality. It shows how a single man can change the world and then suffer alone for it. It shows how a soul can be brilliant and broken at the same time. We must never forget what he gave us, and we must never forget what it cost him. If you felt this story, if this story touched your heart, if you learned something powerful, if you now see the world